Good morning, anti-sheeple pleaser family. This is M, the anti-sheeple pleaser Mitchell. I am back in the building once again. I've had a lot of questions about the wildfires going on in California. I actually had some people from California contacting me via email. Shout out to you guys. Sorry it's taking me a couple of weeks. Every time I actually try to upload a video on this, something happens with my computer. I kid you not. Something happens with my computer, or either there's something going on in my household and I'm not able to finish the video. But today I do have time and I will go ahead and address it. For those of you, before I begin, for those of you that have not seen the video with the tree burning inside, I'll see if I can connect that to this video, or at least leave it in the description box so you guys can click on that. And the reason why I bring that up is because there's no way on this green earth that a tree can start a fire from the inside. I mean, the inside of the tree was literally burning and it just be a wildfire. That just doesn't happen. But anyhow, I'm going to read an article. It's on directed energy weapons for political control. And the article was actually, this is actually it was composed as a talk for the Carnicom Institute. It was a webinar, and this came out in March of 2011, approximately March 31st. And just like I said, we're usually about 10 to 20 years behind them. So if this information was out then, you can imagine how far they've come now. It begins as such. Like nuclear radiation, the electromagnetic radiation technology in which we become so enmeshed will require a painful learning curve. We're engaged in a giant worldwide experiment in which electropollution, biological stress, mental health, and even judicial systems demand serious rethinking. It might be comforting to believe that ignorance of the impact on human health here and now and in future generations lies behind the present proliferation of cell towers and Wi-Fi technology. But the truth is that the dangers inherent in non-ionizing, non-thermal electromagnetic technology have been well known, at least to military-funded scientists, since Project Pandora in the mid-1960s. In the early era of radar operation systems of sterility, baldness, cataracts, behind the lenses, white blood cell proliferation, and chromosome changes pointed the way, as did their children with Down syndrome. The military's response was to create yet more secret classifications and to make sure the thermal power density norms ignored non-thermal effects. The Cold War and EM open field research was to be protected at all costs. Biological health be damned. In the mid-1990s, the American National Studies Institute adopted the safety levels of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. For frequency, 300 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz with everything in North America. Western Europe and Japan set for 50 to 60 hertz fields. For power, the 10 to 100 milliwatts per square centimeter. Standards was a far cry from that of Soviet Russia. Indeed, if the Soviets' limit of 1.0 microwatt to 10 microwatts in the workplace were adopted in the USA, 90% of FM radio stations would have to be shut down. For specific absorption rate, standards of cell phones and towers, the Federal Communications Commission relied on the IEEE again, as well as on the National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements, and then garnered legitimacy from the Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, none of which backed the standard with scientific research, choosing instead to believe the IEEE story that the effects of non-thermal EMR are not dangerous. Despite repeated evidence of biological effects following the non-thermal power densities of 1,000 to 10,000 microwatts. So it should not be surprising that none of these standards is law. The military-industrial complex continues to use the frequencies and power that it pleases, from everything running on a battery to electric trains, refinement. plants, anti-theft systems, metal detectors, air and sea navigation, military communication, 500,000 miles of high-voltage power lines, and their switching stations operating as gigantic antennae, and the extremely low frequency known as ELF, band at 60 Hz, and on and on. ELF fields bombard us everywhere, with the human body's resonant frequency acting as an antenna or a tower. In fact, ambient ELF systems overlap frequencies and pulse our bodies, interfering with our biocycle, timing, and thus undermining our immune systems. Peak resonant frequencies lie in the middle of the very high frequency band and includes FM radio, television, land mobile stations, long-range communication with radio modems, ham radio, marine communications, air traffic control, etc., etc. Superconducting cables increase the field strength around power lines by 20 times, and somehow it's fine that microwave ovens leak up to 5,000 microwatts, and that the cumulative density of radio waves around us is more than 200 million times the natural level from the sun, including the solar magnetic storms that affect the Schumann frequency, a fact reflected in the high level of psychiatric hospital admissions during solar storms. Despite corporate media disinformation, those of us who have been paying attention know that extremely low frequencies have a primary impact on all life forms, and that lower power densities can do more damage than higher densities, particularly when it comes to radio frequency, or microwave absorption. In his 1985 book, The Body Electric, Electromagnetism and the Foundation of Life, Robert O. Becker, MD, stressed that we should be most concerned about extremely low frequencies. The major problems come from extremely low frequencies, but higher frequencies have the same effects if pulsed or modulated in the ELF range. This is very often the case, for to transmit information, microwaves or radio waves must be shaped. This is done by interrupting the beam to form pulses, or by modulating the frequency or amplitude of the waves. Furthermore, today's environment is a lattice work of crisscrossing signals, in which there's always the possibility of synergistic effects or the construction of new ELF signals from the patterns of interference between two higher frequencies. Therefore, experiments in which cells or organisms are exposed to a single unmodulated frequency, though sometimes useful, are irrelevant outside the lab. They're most often done by researchers whose only goal is to be able to see, there's no cause for alarm. Many experiments have confirmed stress reactions to ELF magnetic and electrical fields in microwave exposures, stress being the precursor to a disease condition that calls upon the immune system to work its healing magic. However, if stress never lets up, the immune system is under attack 24/7. Dr. Becker noted, in his pioneering life work on stress, Dr. Hans Seily has clearly drawn the invariable pattern. Initially, the stress activates the hormonal and our immune systems to a higher than normal level, enabling the animal to escape danger or combat disease. If the stress continues, hormone levels and immune reactivity gradually decline to normal. If you stop your experiment at this point, you're apparently justified in saying the animal has adopted. The stress is doing it no harm. Nevertheless, if the stressful condition persists, hormone and immune levels decline further, well below normal. In medical terms, stress decompensation has set in, and the animal is now more susceptible to other stressors, including malignant growth and infectious disease. In 10 to 30 years, stress reactions of human beings living under high voltage wires and over underground power lines have casually led to cancer or other internal diseases, including deep depression and suicide. The adrenal cortex becomes exhausted, the endocrine system erratic, and offices with their computers, lightning, telephones, and fax machines, the EM field forces the neurotransmitter acetylcholine to emit subliminal distress symptoms. Blood pressure and brain wave patterns change, and blood triglyceride levels go up, harbingers of stroke, heart attack, and arteriosclerosis, stress response, desynchronized biocycles, interference with cellular metabolism and growth process. The list goes on, culminating in genetic alteration of future generations. Besides the crossfire of radiation from FM radio and television stations and cell phones bouncing from tower to tower, there are military applications as well. Consumers have convenience and careers on their mind, while the military-industrial complex is investing in weapons and control, what it calls C4, Command, Control, Communications, Computers. If you haven't noticed this military presence, Dr. Becker explained why. Because industry and the military demanded unrestricted use of electromagnetic fields and radiation, their intrinsic hazards are often compounded by secrecy and deceit. In my years of piecing together the national security non-sequisters surrounding EM technology, the Lucane, and disinformation landmines, I have found secrecy and deceit to be true in spades. Add to this what electrical engineer Keith Harmon Snow avers. Microwave technologies and electromagnetic energy are used by the military as integral components of weapon systems, precisely because they are detrimental to life. The events of September 11, 2001, marked a dramatic turning point in many ways, one being the increased use of electromagnetic weapons for public shock and awe, from electronic surveillance technology like radiating devices and receivers, non-radiating devices, and laser-facilitated listening devices, both ground and satellite, too hot on the hook phones, smartphones, and X-audio software to detect and decode emotions, etc. The 1998 film Enemy at the Stake, starring Will Smith and Gene Hackman, offered an infotainment preview of how eye-in-the-sky satellites like the IRIS track us with infrared and visuals. Remotely controlled open-source data surveillance technology like microcomputers, pattern recognition, voice, and thought activation, including brainwave monitoring of thoughts, is now big business. In this unseen electromagnetic era, the line between military and civilian is rapidly disappearing as the military redefines all of life as a battle space. Anti-personal weapons, euphemistically known as non-lethal weapons, include sonic phaser, psychotronic scalar wave, and infrared weapons, any of which might be wheeled into any neighborhood, are peaceful political demonstration of any nation that has signed status of forces agreements. Take, for example, the high-power microwave projectile known as the active denial system that pulses electromagnetic radiation at 95 gigahertz, boils molecules in and under the skin, and melts body organs, are the long-range acoustic device, an absolutely silent sonic weapon that launches a thermoelastic wave of acoustic pressure at high frequency in a 30-degree beam which silently screams into the inner ear by bone conduction. A turn of the LRAD dial can cook eyeballs and organs, and permeate auditory damage occurs at 15 meters. This non-lethal device is usually mounted on a Hummer and is primarily used for crowd control. So much for the First Amendment, freedom of assembly. An anti-material electromagnetic pulse is the burst of EM radiation resulting from a nuclear detonation and are a suddenly fluctuating magnetic field, rapidly changing electric or magnetic fields, then couple with electronic systems and produce damaging current and voltage surges. A detonation a few thousand miles above the Earth can destroy, not just paralyze, electronics across the continent. Then there are the EM weapons that are even less public because they are being used covertly for political control in a quiet war against populations. Dissidents and individuals displeasing to various powers that be. Examples include laser systems, delivering blurred vision and holograms, ion beam plasma, augmented reality, mind control delivered by satellites that first track targets via their bioenergetic signatures, and then couple plasma with their EM fields, and of course, non-RL carriers that directly induce silent subliminal messages into the brain, often known as voice-to-skull or synthetic telepathy. In line with Cold War secrecy and deceit, thousands of non-consensual human subjects have been used for target practice of weaponized electromagnetics. Let's begin with the U.S. bicentennial of July 4th, 1976, when a Soviet ultra-low frequency radio signal known as the woodpecker was finally detected. From an enormous Telsa magnifying transmitter in Kiev, a pulse at a median of 10 Hz was being sent to somewhere between Corvallis and Eugene, Oregon. Efficient carriers of mind control signals in that they can pass through a skull that is otherwise resistant to low-level, non-pulsed electromagnetic radiations, as in ELFs. It is thus more than coincidental that between 1970 and 1975, the suicide rate in Medford, Oregon, rose far above the national average. What is less known is that the nearby U.S. military base had been streaming the Soviet woodpecker signal into Medford for years. What this reveals is that these two titans colluded in EM experiments of nuclear magnetic resonance, induction of cancers, interference with mental processes, etc. throughout the Cold War. In fact, the Soviet woodpecker had been zapping the U.S. Embassy in Moscow since the 1950s with the tacit consent of American intelligence under Project Pandora. By 1978, the CIA's Operation Peak, precursor to the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP, would be bouncing radio signals off the ionosphere and measuring the various effects on specific populations. On August 17, 1975, Senator Frank Church, heading up the U.S. Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, went on NBC's Meet the Press and said the following: "I know the capacity that is there to make tyranny total in America, and we must see to it that this agency, the National Security Agency, and all agencies that possess this technology operate within the law and under proper supervision so that we never cross over that abyss from which there is no return." That same year, the Soviets proposed a ban on EM weapons to the United Nations General Assembly. Later at 1978, SALT, which stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, treaty negotiations, Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev described these weapons as more frightful than the mind of man has ever conceived. He was looking towards a future of electron amnesia beams and magnophosphine guns that make you see stars, handheld VLF infrasound generators that trigger nausea, diarrhea, and abdominal pain, brilliant eye surveillance satellites equipped with multispectral scanners, interferometers, visible infrared spin scan, radiometers, cryocoolers, hydride sorption beds, brain maps, and neurophones, electronic imaging satellite beams that lock onto human targets in real time and assault them with lasers. Cold War MK-Ultra programs were always seamlessly morphing into remote electromagnetic mind control programs back in the 1950s. CIA-funded W. Ross Addy, MD, at the Brain Research Institute of the University of California, Los Angeles, was studying pulse frequencies for confusion beam weaponry. By interfering with the brain's calcium flow, concentration, sleep, and brain functions could be disrupted. Author Evelyn Waugh may have been the target of such a technology. The Russian chess champion Boris Spassky claimed that he lost the 1972 World Championship to Bobby Fischer due to being bombarded with confusion rays. Then there was the LIDA, a Soviet brain entertainment machine that emitted waves at 10 hertz, followed in 1958 by the neurophone, which was invented by Patrick Flanagan, PhD, as a 13-year-old in Bel-Air, Texas. The neurophone could deliver audio harassment via microwaves or lasers by first converting sound to electrical impulses that would then be transmitted on radio waves to the skin and convince the brain that it had heard a sound. The neurophone, like all mind control discoveries, was quickly given a national security classification. In 1961, neuroscientist Alan Frey sliced microwave carriers, inserted audio modulation, and remotely sent microwave hearing to the auditory cortex of targets. It was found that pulsing microwave beams increased the permeability of the blood-brain barrier, which in turn enhanced the effects of drugs, bacteria, and poisons. Frey could speed up, slow down, or stop hearts by synchronizing heartbeat to a pulsed microwave beam. In 1969, Yale professor Jose M.R. Delgado, a Spanish advocate of psycho-civilized society, perfected remote electrical stimulation of the brain, known as ESB, to control behaviors, actions, instincts, and emotions from a distance. Today, focused EMR beams can manage the brain like an electrical toy. Targets can tell when they're being zapped by lower power microwaves, pulse at 300 to 3000 megahertz, because the beam will boom, hiss, click, or buzz just behind the head. In the 1970s and 1980s, Russian scientist Igor Smirnov, the father of psychocorrection, an ice-cold term that he coined to denote the use of subliminal messages to alter the will or modify the personality without the subject's knowledge, utilized electrosyncographs, also known as EEGs, to measure brainwaves. From the EEG, Smirnov could create the computerized map of the individual's subconscious, including impulses such as anger and sex drive. With tapped subliminal messages, Smirnov could alter the mental landscape. In 1973, Joseph C. Sharp, PhD, of the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, modeled the pulsed microwave audiogram, an analog of word sound vibrations, on Dr. Flanagan's neurophone and beamed words into the brain. Synthetic telepathy connects sub-vocalized signals in the brain to a computer via a maser beam. Software then associates specific brain exciting potentials with particular words in reels, sub-vocalized 15 hertz to 5 megahertz, thoughts from the auditory cortex. It's the closed-circuit television of the mind. By using ELF audiograms carried by a single pulse modulated miser, sub-vocalized thoughts of synthetic telepathy operators can be beamed into the target's brain for forced conversation. As Dr. Becker wrote, such a device has obvious applications in covert operations designed to drive a target crazy with voices or deliver undetectable instructions to a programmed assassin. Brainwave monitors eventually graduated from EEGs to MEGs. So from EEGs to MEGs. I can't pronounce that word. I'm not going through all that. That correlate brainwave patterns via a remote crystalline computer whose software reads and translates spoken words and silent thoughts. MEG scanners have the speed and resolution to make brain-machine interface possible, and room temperature superconductors have made MEGs portable, perfect for in-the-field experimentation or harassment. In 2003, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency launched the Brain-Machine Interfaces Program to create new technologies for augmenting human performance through the ability to non-invasively access these codes in the brain in real time and integrate them into peripheral devices or systems operations. Today, U.S. Special Forces Soldiers wear MEG scanner, thought helmets, and carry backpack signal processing supercomputers. 10 years after Brezhnev warning, Dr. Becker was still issuing the same warning. Eventual monitoring of evoked potentials from the EEG combined with radio frequency and microwave broadcasts designed to produce specific thoughts or moods, such as compliance and complacency, promises a method of mind control that poses immense danger to all societies. Tyranny without terror. The hypnotic familiarity of TV and radio, combined with the biological effects of their broadcast beams, may already constitute a similar force of mass standardization, whether by design or not. National Security Agency signals intelligence, monitors brainwaves via satellite, decodes evoked 5.0 milliwatt potentials of the brain at 3.5 hertz, then transmits them to a very high-speed integrated circuit computer monitor for forced conversations. For EEG cloning, the target's electromagnetic field is first monitored, then decoded via computer software, after which the emotional patterns are fed back to the target's brain or to another brain. Place a 5.0 micromillimeter microchip in the optic nerve, and neural impulses can be drawn from the brain to eavesdrop on the implanted person, after which the thoughts are transferred to a computer for storage until being projected back into the brain to be re-experienced as hallucinations, voices from the past, conversations, etc. In his Citizen Smith blog, researcher Paul Baird described the process this way. Human thought operates at 5,000 bits a second, but satellites in various forms of biotelemetry can deliver those thoughts to supercomputers in Maryland, USA, Israel, etc., which have a speed of 20 billion bits per second each. These even today monitor millions of people simultaneously. Eventually, they will monitor almost everyone, worse than any Orwellian Big Brother nightmare you could possibly imagine, only it will be reality. Yet our world leaders know nothing. Yet our world leaders who know this do nothing. Usually the targets are aware their brain waves are being monitored because of the accompanying neural feedback. In other words, the computer repeats your own thoughts, and then the human monitors comment or respond verbally. Both are facilitated by the neural phone, whilst the live human comments are individualistic and unrelated to the victim's own thought processes. Oftentimes, the artificial intelligence involved will parrot standard phrases. These are triggered by your thoughts, while the human monitors remain silent or absent. To comprehend how terrible such a thorough invasion of privacy can be, imagine being quizzed on your past as you lie in bed. You eventually fall off to sleep, having personal or induced dreams, only to wake to the monitors commenting or ridiculing your subconscious thoughts or dreams. In homes and offices across the nation, millimeter wave scanners are penetrating walls, looking for target brains for microwave transmitters to being specific mood-inducing excitation potentials into. Other people in the room will be oblivious to the fact that an excitation potential for suicide or murder is resetting the brain of their friend or relative for depression or rage. This technology may have been behind the suicides of political activist Abby Hoffman, singer Kurt Cobain, journalist Gary Webb, etc., etc. British scientist Tim Rifat in the UK explained it this way. Intelligence chiefs are now in seventh heaven. If someone becomes a problem, they get the suicide mind control team parked outside their house. Within weeks, the victim kills himself. If the military intelligence agency does not wish you to commit suicide, they can drive you mad. This is done by beaming the excitation potential of a particular pathological mental state at your brain while you are at home. To aid in this, the intelligence operatives can play sounds and speech in the target victim's brain. This intercerebral hearing is used to drive the victim mad, as no one else can hear the voices transmitted into the brain of the target. Transmission of auditory data directly into the target's brains using microwave carrier beams is now common practice. It doesn't take a rocket scientist degree to see that remote satellite tracking and over-the-horizon technologies are not just about terrorists. Remote torture and interrogation, memories triggered by neurophone questioning, and brainwave analyzers delivering forced conversations and programming are about the establishment of electronic POW concentration camps in our own homes and workplaces. They're about mental rape and intellectual property stolen right out of our heads. The silent, invisible, unprovable uses such weapons can be put to is mind-boggling. When Michael Dukakis had the misfortune of running against former CIA Director George H.W. Bush in the 1988 U.S. presidential election, his wife Kitty was driven to the brink of suicide. And yet how could one prove it was due to an EM assault? The thoughts and emotions of millions of targets are being collected and archived on computers for 1,000 nefarious uses, while the lowest of the low continue to monitor and harass whomever their masters command. Does the U.S. Constitution's Fourth Amendment cover the unreasonable search and seizure of minds? Attempts to curb the illegal use of non-lethal weapons have so far failed or been toothless. Senator John Glenn, who well knows the truth of this technology, introduced a bill called the Human Research Subjects Protection Act of 1997, and it failed. On January 28, 1999, the European Parliament passed Resolution A4-0005/1999. The draft resolution specifically addressed EMR weapons, but the wording in Section 27 of the final resolution included a global ban on all developments and deployments of weapons which might enable any form of manipulation of human beings. In 2001, H.R. 2977, the U.S. Space Preservation Act of 2001, was introduced into Congress to ban all directed energy weapons. After several rewrites, it failed to be passed. In 2002, the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research formally listed a new category of weapon of mass destruction: psychotronic mind control and other electromagnetic resonance weapons. To my knowledge, the only laws on the books that criminalize the use of EM weapons against citizens are Michigan Public Acts 256 and 257, signed by Canadian-born Governor Jennifer Granholm on December 28, 2003. The penalty, according to Act 257, is 15 years to life, but are abusers being prosecuted in Michigan. When Senator Church referred to this agency, the NSA, and all agencies that possess this technology in 1975, he was not just thinking of the NSA, CIA, and FBI, but the Defense Intelligence Agency as well. The asymmetric revolution in military affairs has always included cognitive warfare that utilizes strategic personality stimulations, multiple personalities created by MKUltra for very covert missions. The cognology of nanotechnology, biotechnology, and information technology has always been front and center. Intel operatives are transmatized in electroshock to erase memories. U.S. Navy SEAL assassins are brainwiped. Soldiers are injected with intelligence-made interface biotics so that 20 billion bit per second NSA supercomputers can track them and see and hear what they experience with the remote monitoring system. Now, the line between civilian and military has been erased, and we are all living in the battle space. Private security firms, mobsters, and lowlives contracting with the intelligence community are doing its dirty work so that congressional oversight can be avoided. The tasks of such hitmen include the aforementioned suicide known in the intel business as NSA self-initiated executions, the final phase of remotely driven psychological engineering, or the hitmen are managing cerebral imaging and dreams at a distance via the scalar component of a weak magnetic field. Nuclear engineer Lieutenant Colonel Thomas E. Bearden said in a 1991 interview that scalar electromagnetic phenomena make it possible to construct thought forms to order and input them directly into the mind and long-term memory through what he calls a hidden channel to pipe in inputs. This is the new cognitive warfare, a form of mind control that employs acoustical, optimal, and electromagnetic fields, or a combination thereof, to interfere with biological processes. Voluntary muscle movements can be restrained, emotions and actions controlled, sleep produced or prevented, short and long-term memories wiped, all by remote control, S4's silent sound spread spectrum. On board the EC-130E Commando Solo entrained brainwaves, then piggyback stored emotion signature clusters are voice commands on AM, FM, HF, TV, or military bands via the military's Omega communication system. Broadcast preparatory sets encoded on microwave beams produce heart attacks, strokes, paralysis, etc. Illnesses like flu are fired at targets. Buildings where dissident groups meet are turned into instantaneous hotspots. Government abductions are disguised as alien abductions with paralysis beams, followed by short-term memory wipes and implantation of false memories. Bugging is now a matter of firing lasers at windows to expose the modulations of sounds inside. Even the subliminals on television and in films have not been eliminated, just improved. Embedded low-light images are blended just below the threshold of normal vision to produce a film within a film, along with precise digital transmissions and hexadecimal color codes, like the ones in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and that was in 1977. And don't forget the subliminals at concerts and on MP3s. The public tends to forget that telecommunication corporations are military contractors wielding almost absolute power over communities. Few know that in 1995, the year before the Flagrant Telecommunications Act of 1996, the U.S. Department of Defense and Department of Justice, via the National Institute of Justice, merged the U.S. military, defense contractors, military-endowed science, and law enforcement around a joint policy of dual use for non-lethal weapons like the ADS, long-range acoustic devices, and the remote EM mind control technologies discussed here, and shifted the Cold War term external enemy, which in normal English means anyone whose activities displease the military or law enforcement. Speaking of communities, Operation Weed and Seed is said to be a Department of Justice community development initiative whose intent is to combat violent crime, drug use, and gangs. Is it, or does it have another agenda? In his 1997 book, Mind Control, World Control, the late researcher Jim Keith related how he lived for 3 years in the Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco, where the top of the federal building was actually a radar, microwave and radio shield for an array of communications devices. From that roof, you could see anywhere in the Tenderloin, which also meant the radio waves had clear passage in any direction. Given that ELF and ULF emissions well through earth or buildings, Keith noticed that his thoughts were disrupted early morning and evening by a low buzzing or humming coming from inside his head. He heard neighbors shouting and threatening outside, and slowly released that the Tenderloin was a double-blind experiment being monitored through the police department, who would take seriously the complaints of anyone poor, mentally unstable, or addicted. Tim Ryfat reported in 1999 that Sussex, UK police have exclusive use of the 450 megahertz microwave frequency on its 200-foot antenna, the same frequency used by Ross Addy, pulsed at 0.75 for behavior modification. This is the same pulse modulation as in cell phone earpieces. Pulse an ELF signal at this frequency out to the antenna around town, and it will resonate in the pulse fields around the power lines, re-radicate, and enter homes through light circuits. Hundreds of microwave towers and antenna are going up to accommodate the now 5.0 gigabyte iPhones in a net-rad pulse-modulated grid. At the top of each tower is long-wave tissue-penetrating microwave radiation, bombarding everyone below and in its path. At the bottom, video monitors, miniature sensors, and signals processing, supposedly for weather and atmospheric surveillance, detection and biological agents, radiation release, etc. NatRad was crafted by the military-industrial complex, UMass Microwave Remote Sensing Laboratory, A&T, Radionics Corporation, and other arms of the military contractor Octopus, protected by the Harvard Center for Risk Analysis, and industry front-funded by 100 of the world's largest, most powerful corporations, surely one of the active sponsors of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. In the guise of consumer convenience, dual-use technology is arriving in every neighborhood. Dual use, double jeopardy. Much of the historical data in this essay comes from CIA testimony given on September 21, 1977, before the Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research, along with FOIA requests of the classified materials. More information is available on the internet, thanks to researchers and targets who have directly experienced DEW torture, non-consensual experimental subjects who are often highly verbal, individualistic people living alone without good family relations, but whose relatives are often connected with intelligence or security services. Though not all reports are credible, my experience has been that most are. If you are somewhat familiar with how the technology works, we are lab rats in a Dr. Martin Seligman learned helplessness experiment. Our fear and depression, positivity, isolation, poor health, immobility, stress, and even madness and suicide are reported and followed up. Report electronic surveillance and harassment to the police, and you are discredited, thanks to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, crafted by the American Psychiatric Association, in part as cover diagnosis for exotic high-tech technologies. Check into a psychiatric ward for safety, and you'll be diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic and discredited. I can attest to that. These weapons may await those Americans who still seek to exercise the vanishing Bill of Rights. In our cities, we no longer hear or feel the Earth's Schumann resonance at which all of life pulsates. We are imprisoned in an EM fog, slow-boiling frogs in an EM soup. Our biological cycles are off, and chronic stress and disease are mounting. Meanwhile, the medical and pharmaceutical industries grow richer than in their wildest dreams. As Dr. Becker said, the ultimate weapon is manipulation of our EM environment because its imperceptibility subtle and strikes at the core of life itself. While we're on the cell phone or computer, listening to music, watching television, or transiting the X-ray scanner at the airport. It is time to challenge the technological spell we are under and examine the devil's deal we have made with powers who have an enhanced transhumanist future in mind for us. As former U.S. Navy engineer Eleanor White writes, for the first time in history, one human being from hiding at a distance can control the thoughts and actions of another by way of undetectable hypnosis. Using still classified electronic technology, these devices have totally disabled the world's justice systems. Zero evidence weapons make revenge crimes routine and easy. Loss of freedom of thought means much more than the loss of a republic. It means the loss of civilization and what it is to be human. These costs of sleeping in our chains of comfort and convenience are too much to pay. I will have the link for this article in the description box. I did read the entire thing. I did not skip through anything, but you definitely want to come and check this out yourself because it has all the references that they actually got their information from. And if you're any type of researcher like I am, you're not just going to believe what someone says. You're actually going to go out and do your own research, which is something I always suggest people do. This makes perfect sense. I've actually spoken to quite a few TIs. There is one TI that I'm actually going to interview this Saturday. I will interview her via phone. I'm not going to put her on live for various reasons. But I will interview her via phone, and I will play the recording for you so that you can listen to what it is that she has to say. I work with several people in the mental health community, And, you know, I actually ran into a gentleman before not long ago who stated he used to work for the military. I'm one of those people where people just come out and start talking to me. I mean, just out of the blue. And this man approached me and just started talking to me about various things. And he said one of the things he used to do in the military was act as if he could hear something in order to make sure that the technology they were testing certain recruits on was working. Because he might hear someone yell or something, but he would make the recruit think that he didn't hear anything. He's like, what? I didn't hear that. You know, you're bugging. And he's also been said to go into different rooms and scream and say something to these recruits and then act as if they are crazy. You understand? So things like this do go on. There's also, I'm going to do another article probably this weekend about the directed energy weapons with the fires that are going on in California. This ties into it, but it would be way too long for me to continue with that part of it as well. If you have any feedback or if you are a targeted individual, I do know a couple. I am interviewing targeted individuals. Give me a holla. Leave me your email address, or either you could contact me at my email address, which is antisheeplepleaser@gmail.com, all lowercase. Give your thumbs up, thumbs down. I'm definitely looking for some feedback on this. And I really, really want to hear from my TIs more than anyone else. I mean, everyone else is more than free to comment, but I really, really want to hear from my TIs out here because I definitely understand what they're going through. Follow me on Facebook or Twitter if you haven't already. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you can know when I'm putting out a new video. Other than that, you guys enjoy the rest of your day. I'm out.